Well, hello, America. I'm back just in time for the Gallup poll to tell us that American patriotism is at an all-time low if you're a Democrat or, I guess, Elon Musk. Welcome to Grounded, the place to hear the salty truth. I'm your host, Scott Cates, coming to you live from the Northeast Georgia mountains and the tiny town of Tiger. Yeah, at extended hiatus, I had to take a little bit of time just because maybe your life is like mine, just been very busy. It seems like Easter came and took place, and life got incredibly busy from that point forward. Spent some time out of town doing some things, and coming back into town, just couldn't carry the portable podcast with me. Plus, I needed just a few minutes to get a few things organized. You know how life is, that sort of thing. But for those of you that texted or called to tell me that you were looking forward to the podcast, especially after the bombing of the nuclear facility in Iran, people wondering what I thought about that. Those of you that contacted me, thank you. You were missed. Talking to you, you were missed as well. I wanted you to know that. So let's get right into today, because my pending pile today is huge with so many different things. I'm not going to be able to cover them all, but there are a few things I do want to talk about. First of all, the gotcha headlines never change. They just don't. Patriotism is at an all-time low. Is the article that I was looking at earlier. It hits a record low. And then it says this: if you're a Democrat or an independent. It talks about that. And obviously, if you're Elon Musk, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes too as well, because all of your tax credits got removed towards your vehicles. So that's a very hard thing. You know, isn't it amazing? Can I just take a side note here before I begin? It's really tough when a friendship goes awry and you go from, the fact you love, being with each other, and then you can't stand each other. It's terrible when a friendship goes awry like that. And then what these guys are throwing back and forth as they throw out their stuff through social networking. So sometimes I wonder, is social networking sort of like the century, or this would be like the century of toddlers? The way they throw this stuff out there. Now, we go back to the bombing. I'll get back. I promise. I'll come right back around to patriotism in just a second in this article. So don't go anywhere, because you have to get into the article to sort of see the details. But I do want to talk about the bombing. Nobody in their right mind wants to give radical Islam the ability to have nuclear weapons. I mean, no one in their right mind. The reason why that is because when it comes to violence, and to be honest, when it gets down to it, one of the articles that I had put in my pending pile was all about the disrespect, according to the Iranians, the disrespect that was coming, and the fact that they believe, or let me find it here. This is Iran. Iran turns around after the bombing, and it warns of real capabilities, quote unquote, real capabilities, if Trump does not drop the disrespectful tone toward their supreme leader, the Ayatollah. Now, this I thought was really bold. Can I just say this to you? When have you ever known Trump ever to drop a disrespectful tone on anything? I mean, so Iran steps up and demands respect from what they call the supreme leader, the Ayatollah. Now, and let me just go. I'm not sure if I can deja vu with you for just a minute, but let's go back. When's the last time that we saw someone actually demand to be called the supreme leader? The supreme leader. Let's see. When was that? Oh, I get it. World War II. Yeah. That would have been Hitler. It's amazing how all the way leading up to the election, that the Democrats were so busy trying to paint Trump as quote unquote Hitler. And yet the man who demands to be called the supreme leader, and all of his people that he's demanding to call that, and now demanding our national leader to call him the ultimate supreme leader here, this is Nazism. And for most of you that don't understand and know, most people they're not aware of the fact that during World War II, that Adolf Hitler actually did have some great influence with Arabs in the Middle East. And he went to help train Arabs to fight against the Jews because they were fired up already and furious. Even before their nation existed, even before Israel existed, he's busy developing and training. He sent SS men to train troops in the SS ways for Islam. And he ends up sending them to the Middle East. While they're in the Middle East, there are literally just thousands of men who are trained that are Arabs, like the SS. Some of them wore the SS uniforms, believe it or not. And so what's interesting about that is from really starting in about the late 1960s all the way up to really the current digital age, the propaganda that had been coming out of the Shiites that were radical. And not all of them are, but the Shiites that were radical, the radical Islam movement, looked identical to World War II propaganda that came out of Nazi Germany. It's amazing because the same terms are being used as well. Yet because we don't know our history, and I have something that I have an article on that too that I was looking about the downplaying of American history and how the protesting that is going on was developed literally on purpose in the American classroom and has been for a long time. But purposefully not teaching history, which is why you could step up and label anyone what you want to label them today, especially with people who would not know what the history would be about. Yes, they did. They trained in radical Islam. A part of the reasons why the Arabs that are radical are that way is because they were trained by the Nazis during World War II. As a matter of fact, once the war was over, the SS troops that were there were basically, that were already trained there, that were radical already, were left there. One of those who followed by in that teaching was one of the leaders that raised up, said, "Give me your children, I will give you an army." And they have. So radical Islam, I'm not talking about regular Islam, I'm talking about radical Islam, had some assistance from the Nazis during and after World War II, just so that you understand that, which is why the propaganda and the titles look the way that they do. So here you have one stepping up saying, hey, the supreme leader says, tone down your disrespect. And I think it may be, and we know Trump, we know who he is. I think Trump's response, I'm shocked that his response was, maybe I'll just write a letter of apology. I think if you can think about it in Trump's way, he'll say, I'll just write a letter of apology. Tell me where to send that to, and I'll have a B-2 bomber send that straight to you and personal delivery wherever it is you're located. So if you'll just come out of hiding long enough so that I can write you my letter of apology of disrespect and deliver it, I'll have it by your door in 24 hours or less. It'll come quickly from the sky. You'll have to grab a hold of it quick, 5 feet before the bomb goes off, 5 feet above the floor. You see that? Those bunker busters, 30,000-pound bunker busters, that come down and literally measure 5 feet from the floor, then they explode. So yeah, write your letter of apology, and then at the end of it, 5 feet from the floor, make sure you grab it off the front of that and read it before, because you don't have much time. That would be what I would expect Trump's response probably would be. But yeah, I don't think he's going to go with the apology side. As a matter of fact, his response to that was you meddle with nuclear weapons again, and I'll bomb you again. He is what he is. Just like the other, this thing with Elon Musk over the current big, beautiful bill package and him stepping out over the last, few days, and there being an argument, and Musk saying, talking about the Republican Party being porky pig. He's calling that because of all the pork that's in this. Well, that's interesting to me. Because if the bill could have been passed the way that it was, they would have left much of the pork out of it. But the way that we work is it goes in and everyone wants to stick their piece of whatever on it, and they pork it up, no matter what the bill is. And it's amazing because, this is Elon Musk. And of course, the media has gotten a hold of this as well. And he said, well, if they pass this bill, there are two things I'm going to do. I'm going to create a new party called the American Party. And then I'm going to I'm also going to do this. I'm going to make sure that every single Republican that voted for it will be voted out in the next primary. Hey, so be it, on that. Whatever that he tries to do. My question is going to be, the threat level is huge coming from that side. So as we watch this bill go through, and we have no idea where it's headed, on this week of 4th of July, the 4th of July, our 249th birthday, coming up Friday, we'll see how the bill goes. It's going to go back and forth. Will it pass? It's going to be by the skin of its teeth if it does. And if it doesn't, then you have Trump that's threatening to, in the last 24 hours, to say, well, taxes will be raised 68% if it doesn't get passed. So he's trying to blame it on, he'll actually blame it on, if it doesn't get passed, a tax increase on the fact that it wasn't passed. And he's got a point. There are going to be some things that are going to go up. What is Musk upset about? Well, there are three parts of this bill that, if you look into it, the major thing that Mr. Musk is actually upset about, it is the pork. And part of the pork is, and the reason why it's not being passed quickly is because the Democrats want to add to the package. They want to take some things away, and they want to add more of their pork to the package. One of the things that they want to take away is the work requirement in order to be able to qualify for Medicaid on the federal level. In order for you to be able to qualify for SNAP foods, to show that you've been at least at something 20 hours during, I think it's 40, if I remember, it's like 40 hours of the month, maybe 20 hours out of a week. I can't remember, that you were making some effort toward getting some employment of some kind. So there was an incentive to actually go to work. The other thing about the bill that is there is that it's going to open up the opportunity for Americans to have more jobs in a lot of ways. Already some of the things that have been going on, the tariffs, all of that. See, GE is trying to move. So the General Electric is trying to move all of its operations back to the U.S. It's like, I can't remember, a $5 billion investment to try to get back into the U.S. So a lot of things are taking place. The economy has actually come out of its place of being stagnant. Retail sales have done fairly well for Walmart, Costco, and places that are like that, who have been able to adapt in the new environment of e-commerce. But others that have not done too well right now, and two that are on the list that are huge. One of those is Best Buy has not done real well at the adapting to e-commerce. And so their retail, their external retail establishments, not faring too well. Target's the other. But Target's issue is not, the issue with Target is not the fact that they're not adapting to e-commerce well. I don't believe. I believe it's because of the crazy stances toward fantasy that they have gone, through over the last, 6 to 8 years, which has really done a job on their credibility. Brings me kind of to the point also of why patriotism with Democrats and independents is at an all-time low. Because all of a sudden now, the fantasies that you wish and want to come true are not going to become true because they were never truth to begin with. And let's just move on from there. So the big, beautiful bill that I was telling you about, three things that were in that. And most of it is the reason why Mr. Musk is upset is because of the energy tax credits, which are on the chopping block. And that's the $7,500 tax credit for electric vehicles. That actually is it's scheduled to end on September the 30th. That's 3 months ahead of time if the bill passes, because they want to go ahead and get that out of there. And, and Trump has he does have a good point. He said trying to force electric cars on Americans is not the right move. And then energy efficient home improvements, which is like $2,500 to $5,000 credits if you use the current standards, which were changed a great deal, which means if you get rid of your gas stove and your gas appliances and you go all electric, both you and I know probably at this standpoint that the power grid is already strained. That's been a warning over the last few days. The grid is already strained. So to go to all electric appliances and to do all that puts more of a strain. And it's been this type of energy movement that has moved us to that point, and that strain on the power grid, plus a lack of upgrading through the years, by the way. But right now, trying to cut back on that and ease some of that back. And then finally, the energy efficient home tax credits that go along with that, which means that you're going to be using, you get credits for building things that bring energy into your home. But anyway, it's I'm not going to get into a whole detail on that right this second. But the wind and solar development is the other things that the sources, the subsidizing of the sources of zero emission energy, like solar, wind, nuclear, all of that, as being rescinded right this second. Because of the fact that right now there's been a lot of incentive, and a lot of it's been towards solar. You get tons of money up front if you put in these solar farms or these wind farms in places, but they're not creating or generating enough electricity to make that much of a difference to offset the electric cars and electric appliances, all of that is going on. So it's sort of right now the intention is to sort of slow down the drain on the power grid and to cut back those incentives and let Americans choose which way they want to go. So most of this has to do with the climate change initiative, but all of it affects companies that are busy in the development of those things. And right in the target of that would be Elon Musk, that's why I would expect this would be the issue. You got a friendship that's going on. He steps up. He is, and then he pulls it looks like he pulls the friend card here. And Mr. Trump is not going to have the friend card pulled here. He doesn't want the friend card pulled. He's been running on the same campaign promises. And I think Mr. Musk was hoping that the friend card being pulled would help. It just didn't. So there's all of that for you. In the middle of all of that, of course, the subsidies are going to cut back, which is going to affect that area of production in the U.S. But other areas are going to increase. In the big, beautiful bill that he calls it, there is incentive to buy American cars. There, you get a tax credit. Actually, it's a tax credit on the interest that you would borrow. So if you borrow money, your interest can be written off. If you make less, than $125,000 a year, your interest can be written off on your car, very much like it would be for the interest on a house if you buy an American vehicle. It's a part of that bill as well. So, all of that going on. Another article that I saw that I looked at that's very interesting, you have to really get into. By the way, first of all, let me go back to patriotism being at an all-time low. You have to get into that article to understand exactly what's being said here. And there are a couple of articles that are like that. These are sort of gotcha articles, and I've noticed that we used to see this a lot from most outlets that were that were not leaning conservatively. We could expect that. But I'm seeing a lot of these gotcha headlines, and I have been seeing them also from other what I would consider to be a little bit more reputable outlets that actually would lean both ways, to report. But this article coming out of here, which is Fox News, and this is a Fox News article. It says that the Department of Justice directs attorneys to seek to revoke the citizenship of naturalized Americans over crime. That's one of them. And then the Gallup poll that I was telling you about, and not that I really put a lot of stock in Gallup, but the Gallup poll says patriotism's at an all-time low. It's amazing to me that in that article, what's written is that patriotism's at an all-time low because of Democrats and independents. But when you look at the numbers, that's not the case. To be honest with you, when you get into the paragraphs that are on this article, it says this. The first thing it says is that patriotism amongst Democrats and independents has dropped significantly. And so it talks about that only about 38% of Democrats feel like their patriotism has risen. I would think it would be a miracle that 38% of the Democrats' patriotism has risen since Donald Trump was elected. Personally, I would look at that as a miracle between Democrats and independents. But what you see in the article, too, is it says that, and then there is a whopping, and it says this, there's a whopping 58% of Republicans that say their patriotism has risen since the day that Donald Trump took office. And it doesn't say anything about the decline. It just says that 58% say that their patriotism has risen. Now, notice it doesn't say that anything about in the article about the fact that there's been a decline in the Republicans and theirs. So in the asking of the questions, the question could have been asked here, has your patriotism risen? And the answer could have been, no, it's been about the same. And so you could have 58% who say that their patriotism has risen a great deal. And then many of the others who have said it's about the same as it always has been. Now, what's amazing to me about this is we weren't actually putting out articles like this when the Democrats were in office. We did not. You never saw a thing on patriotism being on the rise. Not one thing. Not one thing. But I do know this. I do know people that actually took down their American flags because they were just embarrassed of the way that America had gone. Because more was being fed into the pride of sexual fantasy, the raising up of the pride of the gay and transgender lifestyle than was ever put into American patriotism. Truth. And so when we get down to it, that's much of the issue. I don't think there's a shock here on any of that patriotism would have dropped under those, because where the fantasy they thought maybe by passing a bunch of legislation, it could become this reality. It was never meant to be a reality because it was never centered on absolute truth anyway. So when we get into it, that's what you see. I think it was interesting that Donald Trump is on the telephone with faith leaders. You see this? Maybe you missed this. Most outlets are not going to report this. But Donald Trump was on a conference call with faith leaders throughout the nation. And on his conference call with faith leaders, he was in a conversation. And in that conversation, let me just go on. Let me see here. So in the conversation was with faith leaders and community leaders, and the intention is to develop policy recommendations to protect women and children, to strengthen families and marriages, to promote work and self-sufficiency, to protect religious liberty, and to combat faith-based discrimination, to reduce crime, and many other priorities that would strengthen America and its families. And it's interesting because while on the faith-based telephone call that he was on with this, AT&T had technical issues, and so the call was interrupted on multiple occasions. Of course it is. Not uninterrupted on any other occasion at all, and it interests me that, there's a leak over the bombing, that we see that's going on out there, that we see this leak over the communication coming out of the White House. And now we see that AT&T can't even keep their lines up long enough for this telephone call to come into play. There's, come on, folks, seriously. Because we also know that, some of these organizations that are large like this, their agenda does not fit with anything that might remotely be faith-based. So disrupt all of it is the purpose. All of the negative press, all of it. It's all the purpose. All of this press about patriotism's at an all-time low. If you're a Democrat and if you're an independent, but not if you're a Republican, it's not. Because there's an excitement over the fact that we have gone back to what this nation was founded upon, even with 38% of the Democrats. Just saying. So there we go. In the middle of all of that, in my stack of things to talk about, my pending pile today, that's what we pretty much, here's one of my other articles I wanted to talk about. This is a great shocker here today, I'm sure. In case you missed it, I just want to make sure that we understand this. Because once again, as fantasy is stepped out there and everybody wants their fantasy to be the reality, truth once again, based upon true and genuine science. And I know you're thinking, I'm going to talk about alternate lifestyles. I'm not. I'm actually going to talk about marijuana. Marijuana is not harmless. This article says marijuana is not harmless. As a matter of fact, the opposite is true, and the evidence continues to grow on this. This is an interesting article. It says, as drug advocates push marijuana legalization over the last 15 years, they portray the drug as harmless, a mild intoxicant with very few side effects. It even might have medicinal values, advocates said. The next line is all by itself, and it says this: the truth is the opposite. Even in states from Maine to California that have legalized cannabis, researchers have published paper after paper showing its risks. This doesn't mean that it has risks because of the munchies are falling asleep on the couch. But now they've discovered powerful evidence that is linking the drug to heart attacks, strokes, and then here, severe mental illness, and even suicide. The active chemical called THC is toxic now to the heart and the brain, and much more addictive than people actually realize. Though cannabis does not cause the physical dependence of alcohol, it makes users psychologically dependent, and that leads to irritability, depression, and mood swings if they cut back. Since the legalization of marijuana, it has now been linked to the sharp increase of the diagnosis of marijuana addiction. All of a sudden, the view on cannabis is slowly turning negative. Even in deep blue states like New York. In deep blue states like New York, twice as many residents say that the legalization of marijuana has hurt their quality of life and not helped it. So as we get into more and the future presses ahead, we're discovering that this quote-unquote miracle thing that's been quoted to be legalized and has been all about money, really, when it came down to it, is now quite harmful. And we knew this. We've known this for quite some time. Do you realize, I don't know if you realize this, but one of the leading causes to bipolar disorder is the use of marijuana by young teenagers. By 12 years old, 13 years old, 14 years old, the use of marijuana creates bipolar disorder. It creates great severe depression that actually does come. So the use of marijuana actually begins to, what happens is a teenager in the developmental years, in their years of adolescence, while they're developing, they alter the chemical production in their body. And when they do, it has absolutely awful side effects in the long run. So by the time when they become adults and they become actually hooked on this or whatever, even the use of it a few times while being a teenager can affect them in as far as depression later on in life. But bipolar disorder is one of the number one leading causes of bipolar disorder. Believe it or not, that's the truth. It's so when it comes down to it. So what ends up happening is they get older and they need some sort of medication to regulate out that bipolar disorder. But very, very, very often it leads to suicide in the long run. Not being reported on much, not being spoken about much, but it's been there for a long time. They've known about this a long time. But the whole idea, and listen, folks, this is important that you understand that, because you'll notice he says that in the article, blue states. One more time, blue states. And I realize you look at me and say, well, wait a minute, is this political, Republican or Democrat? I'm telling you that the basis of the foundations of the parties will depend on what happens in the legislation. It always does. And blue states that have said, hey, we'll legalize this are now discovering that their quality of life has not improved, but it's actually gotten much worse as a result of this. Now, who did not see this coming? Well, the reality is people who did not see this coming did not want to see it coming, and the ones who knew it was coming. So it's interesting because over the last few years, we see a lot of things come to fruition that up front we looked at the time and said, no good is going to come out of this. And guess what? It didn't, and it hasn't. Listen, folks, every single time you ignore the absolute truth and you begin to feed the fantasy and you pass legislation to feed the fantasy even more, it never brings that fantasy around to reality. But it does wreak havoc upon civility within the nation from that point forward to generations to come until it's remedied and fixed again. And we stop trying to legislate fantasy and we base our laws and the things that we have on reality and absolute truth. And morality, I think, is important. You can't, I think we discovered in Prohibition, in the years of Prohibition, that you really can't legislate morality. People are going to figure out ways around that. So the legislation of morality, and during Prohibition, trying to tell people that they couldn't drink during Prohibition and trying to make it unavailable and then say it's against the law if you do that. And legislating that morality was never good. But the reality of this was that up to that point in time, and the reason why they had to legislate, and let me explain. Go back to Prohibition. Real quick note on Prohibition. They had to legislate that had to do with alcohol. Because at that time, I think it was 1 in 6 Americans had a problem with alcoholism up to the point where they started Prohibition. That's the whole reason why they started Prohibition. And when they got Prohibition started, it did remedy a lot of that. And alcoholism did go down, believe it or not. Now, in areas where people were going to do it anyway, it did bring forward crime and some things that took place, no doubt about that. The mob, all of that. But the reality, when it came down to it, was Prohibition any good? Well, as long as it was in existence, it was very effective up front at dropping the alcoholism rate in the United States of America. And it did that, and it kept it actually at a lower level than it was at before, once it got put into place. But it was removed at some point because of the fact that you couldn't legislate morality, especially in the large areas. That had to come from being taught as a child, and most of the time in the states where, like the Bible Belt, for instance, during that time. Alcoholism was not as prominent as it was in other areas. Just saying. Let me go back to say this. That's legislating, or to be honest with you, trying to legislate fantasy to try to make it become a reality has never worked, and it never will. It just won't. So when it comes down to it, this whole idea of marijuana, we're discovering the truth about that now, coming forward, and how it's wreaking havoc on so many lives. And I know some of you, it may be listening today here. You may use it for medicinal purposes. I have no idea. And you may be getting it or have it, prescription or whatever in the process. And you may say that you don't agree with me, but this is right here, a national article on this and determining that this is the case. So, these are all things that are going on throughout the nation. Now, I did not cover it in its entirety what's happened over the last 6 weeks. Of course, the bombing took place in Iran, and immediately people look up and go, "This is it. It's the end of the world." And then all of a sudden, that kind of slowed down, at least for the time being. It amazed me how much fear there was within this nation over what the retaliation was going to be on the soil of the homeland. That really amazed me, how we ran in fear quickly on that. When it really comes down to it, they're searching for peace, and they'll always be searching for peace in the Middle East. And there's a reason why that is the case. Peace is not even the peace as far as, Islam against Judaism is not going to be something. They absolutely oppose each other in so many different ways. So that's not going to come easily. It can be lived out in agreements, yes, if they live out those agreements. But when you're talking radical Islam, I don't see that happening. Radical Islam is like giving a revolver loaded to a toddler and saying, "See what you can do with this." So that's why you don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon, because they go, "Let's see what this will do." And they just point the loaded revolver at America or the Jews and decide, "Let's pull the trigger and see how that works." It doesn't work. Shouldn't work. Nobody in their right mind would give a loaded revolver to a toddler to just play with, which is why you don't give nuclear weapons to radical Islamists. It's like putting him in the hands of a toddler, and it is. Because that anger and that fury and that hatred leads to terrible things in the future. The worse the weapon, it doesn't really matter. And that has been shown and proven to be the case, no matter who wants to step up and write any article or any laws that want to legislate that fantasy that everything's going to be okay. It will not be. Hatred's a powerful thing. And hatred in religion is a real powerful thing. Hatred in religion does not lead to peace. It doesn't. I can't remember who said this. It might have been Eisenhower. I can't remember exactly who said it, but it said if you actually want peace in the world, be well prepared for war. And that will keep the peace. Your preparation for war and the fact that you can retaliate will keep the peace. And I realize we look overseas and say, "Well, what about these people?" Well, the truth is that when it comes down to it, some people don't need to have any weapons of any kind, that are going to lead for the death of someone else because they can. And I realize we can run this circle like crazy. What is it that America holds in its doctrine? It does hold peace there. What is it that America holds in its doctrine? It's peace through strength. It should, and always has been known for that. Because every time that America has been weak, the world, on the scale that it's been on, the world literally has had some issues. America has kept world peace in the fact that they've used that peace through strength mentality, and it has worked. And every time we've sort of moved away from that, the world has gone awry. America keeps its doctrine, which is based upon how it was founded. We're about freedom. We are about freedom of speech. One of the other articles that we were looking at here as well, and I come to this, and I know it's all about articles today, and I promise I'll get to biblical principle in just a moment. I read this article off, and I really wanted to get down to this because this article was written as a gotcha article, and it is written not good because I had to really look hard. And this is the article that says the Department of Justice directs U.S. attorneys to seek to revoke the citizenship of naturalized Americans over crime. And if you look at this, what that's trying to say is if you're a naturalized citizen of this country and you're guilty of a crime, that they can revoke your citizenship and send you somewhere else. But you have to get into this article and actually look at what the request actually was to get beyond that headline, because it makes the Department of Justice and the Trump administration look like dictators. But that's not what this article says. It's not what was asked, actually. The memo from the Assistant Attorney General, it says that denaturalization cases against individuals who pose a danger to national security, including those who have ties to terrorism, espionage, or the unlawful export from the United States of sensitive goods or technology spies, basically, or information raising national security concerns. These are part of the key priorities that are here. So the civic denaturalization. Now, here it is. It says has the ability to revoke the citizenship of individuals who engaged in the commission of war crimes, extrajudicial killings, serious human rights abuses, to remove naturalized criminals, gang members, or indeed any individuals convicted of crimes who pose an ongoing threat to the United States, and to prevent convicted terrorists from returning to the U.S. soil or traveling internationally on a U.S. passport. And it says the Department of Justice may institute civil proceedings to revoke a person's United States citizenship if an individual either illegally procured naturalization or procured naturalization by concealment of material, by willful misrepresentation. So let's get into this article for just a minute. All of this so that you can understand. What does all that mean? That means if you came into the United States and you falsified documents to make it look like you're a natural citizen and you're guilty of these crimes, that the first people that they want to prosecute are those who falsified those documents and are guilty. So so bottom line is, if they come to you and they arrest you and you've been guilty of these crimes and they discover that you are not a citizen of the U.S., but you claim to be a naturalized citizen, but you falsified your documents to make it that way, they could immediately revoke your citizenship and actually get you exited from the U.S. When it comes to American citizens, can they revoke your citizenship if you're a naturalized citizen here? That's not what they're trying to do. They're trying to get those who have falsified their documents within this nation to come here to look like naturalized citizens. They're trying to find those who have been guilty of a crime first, revoke their citizenship, and get them out of the country. That's what this is about. And that's important. So when you get down, this is all the cases that are permitted by law according to the Constitution. So as a naturalized citizen, when you're born here on this, when you were literally born here, and a citizen of this nation, that is here, you have the documents that prove that. Now, we can go into a bunch of details on how, they could get around all that or whatever, but they're not going to. That's not the intention of this, what they're doing. Now, the article that's printed makes it look like these guys are tyrants and they're going to just toss out anybody who doesn't go with the agenda. That's not the case. The case is they're trying to find the people who have broken the law. And when they discover that they were not naturalized born citizens, but yet they have falsified documents to say that they were, they need to go immediately. That's what that's about. Another one of the gotcha articles. So if you're not careful and you're just looking at headlines and you don't get into the headlines and you don't begin to really look, you're going to see things that are there. And what's shocking to me is that it doesn't matter who's reporting it right now. It's all about that gotcha, all about that sensationalism. And you have to be careful with every word that you look at. Because I promise you this much right now, none of it is on the positive for the things that are happening to try to change this nation to the foundation that it actually was founded upon. Because right now, there are a lot of people that are in positions of power, authority, and that just do not want that. So rather than report the news as the truth that it is, we spin the living daylights out of that to make it look like something that it truly is not. Again, living in that fantasy world. We paint a fantasy of what's not there. Anyway, what about us? Where are we? Everyday citizens, we're looking at all of these things. I had a lot to cover today in the pending pile. I know it's just been one thing after another as we've gotten to it. Didn't want to spend the next few weeks talking about all of this. It comes down to this. What if you're a believer? If you're a believer in Jesus Christ and you're following Christ and you really want, honestly, to have a great life, I mean, and your life to be good, and in the middle of all the confusion that is out there, first of all, let me just explain a couple of things. There's absolutely nothing you can really do about the fact that they're going to drop bombs in this place, or they're really, as the average citizen, there's nothing you can do. You cast your vote's important, yes. But you can live your life day to day, and you can live it in such a way that you make a difference to those around you and for those of the future. You can live your life in such a way with such a great reality steeped in the truth of where we were founded that it makes a difference in your family's life, your children's life, your neighbor's life, your friend's life, those who are around you. I encourage you to do that because that difference goes a long way. Don't get worried about all of the crazy headlines that are out there. They change every day. It's all about selling advertising anyway, really, when it comes down to it. Paul writes at the end of Galatians chapter 6, he writes something pretty powerful. I love it. It says, let him who is taught the word share in all the good things with him who teaches. Do not be deceived. God's not mocked. For whatever a man sows, that he will also reap. Let me explain. God's not mocked. For whatever he sows, he will also reap. The truth is, you sow to fantasy, you'll listen, when you sow to fantasy, you will reap emptiness every single time, and sometimes worse. Sometimes when you sow to the fantasy, that which you know is not truth, and that which in every evidence in front of your faith is not truth, when you sow to that fantasy, you end up in darkness, in emptiness. Not good. It isn't. So those of us that walk in the truth, for those of us that have been taught in the truth, we need to actually share in all those good things of the truth. God's not mocked. For whatever a man sows, he will also reap. For he who sows to the flesh will of the flesh reap corruption. But he who sows to the Spirit will of the Spirit reap everlasting life. And let us not grow weary while doing good. For in due season we'll reap if we do not lose heart. Therefore, as we have an opportunity, let us do good to all, especially to those who are of the household of faith. What does that all mean? You know, it's something amazing to live a peaceable life, to know that you're following truth and the absolute truth. And it is, there's not, you know, when you're following that absolute truth, the reality is knowing that you are doing and being who you need to be, all that you can be, and living in this reality that of what life truly is, according to the truth of God. Oftentimes, even when it comes to creation, the things that are made and how they're made, and why they're made, the truth of that. At the core, there are a couple of things we've talked about today. At the core, these fantasies that have been chased for 10 years or more, 20 years, whatever, trying to legislate all of this fantasy, all this sexual fantasy, all this crazy stuff that's there has never been a reality. And it'll never reap anything good, because at the end of it, the more you try to prove that it's a reality, the more it comes to light that it's not. And the same thing with the regulation of marijuana when it comes down to that. There wasn't anything about that we knew was going to be good. But the more we decided we pushed that legislation for it, the better we wanted it to be. And what we've discovered now is it's actually far worse than we ever discovered it was. That's the way it works. Listen, the bottom line is when you sow to those things that are truth, you reap truth. And when you sow to those things that are not, you reap the things that are not. And lots of those have terrible consequences. And that's just the way it is. Pretty practical, but it is reality. So today, I don't know where your patriotism is. I have no idea. When it comes down to it, I'm not sure. I'm excited about the fact that we want to actually go back to some of the foundation. I'm excited, the birthday of this nation, 249 years. I'm excited about the 250-year celebration that is coming up. I'm excited about the move back to traditional things, family, the move back toward faith. The fact that people have come to know Jesus in this year in record numbers. That's amazing to me. As the Spirit of God is moving once again throughout this nation, because the reality is the heartbeat of this nation truly is found there. It's found in the love. And it's found, by the way, this is what you really, when it comes down to it, it's found in the love and the morality that is found in the scriptures. That's where the freedom is found in this nation. It always has been. And that's where its strength always has lied. Right there. Still is today. That brings me to you. I'm not really concerned all that much about where your patriotism is. Whether it's up or down, that'll go back and forth. My question is, do you know Jesus? That's the question, and the question of all questions. Secondly, the question would be, if you know Jesus, are you doing this? Whatever a man sows, he reaps. Are you reaping toward the things of the Lord or not? Well, that's the question. You've been listening to Grounded, the place to hear the salty truth. I'm your host, Scott Cates. What does all this mean? Well, first of all, if you don't know Jesus Christ as Savior and Lord, the first way to reap toward those things that are good and true there is to come to know Jesus as Savior. And you yourself today can do that. First of all, you have to understand that there is something in between you and God that is called sin. It is the offense that you have that prevents you from walking with God, that has to be forgiven. Jesus Christ went to the cross, he died on the cross, and he shed his blood to purchase our sins so that they could be removed and that the penalty of those sins could be removed from us, of yesterday, today, and tomorrow, so that we could walk with God. We could hear from God. We could be guided by the Lord, and we could have a relationship with Jesus. And if you desire a relationship with Jesus, and you realize today that, man, my sins are in the way from me being able to walk with God, stop right where you are and say, Lord, forgive me of my sins, please. I know they prevent me from walking with you, so please forgive me of my sins. That's the act of repentance, is that forgiveness. By the way, you could stop and just ask Jesus to forgive you of your sins and then turn back around and say, I want to walk with you beginning today. All of that has to do with repentance and change and transformation that takes place in our life. And it moves us in the direction of all truth, which is amazing. Secondly, if you're a believer today, and maybe a believer in Jesus Christ, or maybe it's been some time, I don't know, maybe you're listening to this podcast today, and you're maybe thinking to yourself, I've reaped some things I shouldn't have reaped. I've sowed some things I shouldn't have sown, and I'm reaping some things. What I mean, I've sowed some things I shouldn't have sown. I'm reaping some things as a result of it. You can stop where you are and say, Lord, forgive me. I've sown some things I know I shouldn't have. And so today I really want to get back and go back to sowing in the Spirit. That can be you today. You could stop there and do that. Otherwise today, let's not grow weary in doing good. In due time, there's a payoff on that, always is. I talked yesterday to some folks about the fact that the foundation looked like it had been crumbling for some time. Well, when the foundation of the wall crumbles, like in Nehemiah, we step up and we go to build the wall. And building the wall back means that we stand and we literally serve the Lord. And we continue to just do the good according to the word of God. we live and we walk in the Spirit in some amazing things like love and joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, all of those things. Because those things reap a harvest that is amazing when we live by it. I thank you for listening today. It's been good to be back. And I will see you next week. I'm not sure right at this point, those of you that are listening, Mondays is kind of, I talk so much on Sundays. I speak publicly on Sundays and for multiple hours that it almost takes me a day to get my voice back into so I may switch it to Tuesdays, which is what I did this week, just to give my voice a break. But I'll let you know in the weeks that are ahead. Folks, have a good week. See you next Monday.